This is the most crucial skill that you can develop as a hacker, whether you want to become a pen tester or a red teamer. And I can guarantee you this is something that the real adversaries, the real hacking groups out there are absolutely amazing at. You know, one thing that you're going to hear time and time again on this journey is enumeration is key. And so we're going to be really honing this skill set in this video. So I have in front of me the Try Hack Me room on enumeration. In this room, we're going to look at tackling enumeration from the perspective of once you already have access to a system. But make no mistake, enumeration is a key piece in hacking throughout, no matter what stage you're in. Even in the very beginning, before you get that initial access, there's other things that you can enumerate, things that you can look into, and it's very important to know your way around there. But specifically, we're going to be looking at the case where you got initial access, whether it's on a Windows system or a Linux system. We're going to be looking at both in this one, by the way. It's going to be very helpful, like I said, whether you want to be a pen tester or a red teamer. Let's just dive right into it. And before we do, one thing I want to say is as you are learning this stuff and leveling up, you're definitely going to want to arm yourself with the top 10 pen testing interview questions that you need to know to ace that interview. And so you can start enumerating some of those interview questions that are very common in this industry. So go ahead and check that out absolutely for free in the description section of the video. And yeah, without further ado, we'll jump right into it. So one thing they're mentioning here is that the fact that whether you have a bash shell on Linux or a CMD shell on Windows, you can jump between the different shells. So for example, if you're in a bash shell, but you want to get to like a C shell or ZSH or something like that, you can normally just switch right into it, provided that it's installed. For cmd.exe, you can jump into PowerShell just by typing PowerShell.exe. So that was the first question there. If you're in a command, like a regular CMD prompt, like for example, I'm in the CMD prompt here, I want to spawn PowerShell, I could just do PowerShell or PowerShell.exe. The .exe part is optional, and you see here that now I am in a PowerShell prompt, which you can see by this PS here. So that's all it's saying in the very beginning. Now let's look into purpose here. It's kind of showing us at a high level some of the things typically that you would look for once you get access to these systems. So we're doing enumeration on like the OS itself. So on a Windows OS or a Linux, depending on what we got our initial access into. So these are some of the things that we can start enumerating specifically and looking into. And one resource that I just want to drop while you're doing that is a resource called Hack Tricks. I use that all the time, and I've shouted out that many times on this channel, is this blog here, this Hack Tricks. So for example, they have a ton, and it kind of depends on what you're looking at specifically. But I know for a fact they also do have some checklists for like privilege escalation and things like that. And within this, there's a lot of similar stuff that they're going to be teaching you guys in here in this room, which I definitely recommend everyone to do. But this is just a really good resource that I wanted to shout out as well, that will show you how to enumerate some of this stuff, and also coming at it from the perspective of privilege escalation, which we're going to get into in a future video specifically on that. Another really solid resource that I want to recommend is Payloads All the Things. And specifically, I know there is a lot of web stuff on here, but if you scroll, I believe you scroll a bit to, and I always forget where this is. It's kind of hidden in here, but there is, for a fact, a bunch of stuff that you can get on when it comes to Windows and Linux, I believe. So let me just Google for it. It might be a little bit easier. It loads all the things. Windows privilege escalation, for example. It'll have a lot of the stuff here as well that could be pretty useful for you, whether it's just doing enumeration like we're going to do here or just full-on privilege escalation. So a couple of shout outs that I wanted to do. I'll drop those in the description below for you guys as well. You know, the first thing we're going to start out with is on the Linux side, doing some Linux enumeration. And for some reason on this room, they have the SSH details all the way at the end. So let me scroll all the way down so I can find the login info. And I'm just going to go ahead and log in via SSH. So we'll put in this, we'll SSH into the system, and specifically we'll put this password here. And yeah, so once we're in the system, we can start And they go through all the details here. I'm not gonna step through all the details. I'll let you guys, I'll save that for you if you go through this room to read every little thing, but the exercises will actually kind of guide us along most of this stuff. So the first challenge they ask us for enumerating is, what is the Linux distribution that's used in the VM? And so if we wanted to find that information, it's actually pretty simple. We can just cat, on a Linux system, we can cat out etc and then asterisk release. And that's going to give us a bunch of info. So we see Ubuntu is the OS that we're dealing with. And then the specific version of that is, well, I guess if you want an even more granular version number here, you have 20.04.4. This is the long-term support version. So that answers the first two questions here. And then they ask, what is the name of the user who last logged into the system? Well, there is a handy utility we can run called last. So you just type last. We see some of these are actively logged in. Well, there's reboot information, right? And user is us, that we're logged in right now as user. So really the last user that logged in was Rhonda right here. So that's that one. And then what is the highest listening TCP port number? We could just leverage the netstat utility to find that. And they said TCP specifically. So we will do T for TCP. We could do verbose, that's fine. Listening, no name resolution, and yeah, then we'll see these here. And this is the highest number here, 6667. So we supply that. And now they ask us, what is the program name of the service listening on it? So if we wanted to get a little bit more granular with that information, what we could do is see how it says PID/program name. We're not running this with high enough permissions. That's why we can't see that. But if we just run that previous command with sudo, and then you got to put in the password. Let me grab that again real fast. Here we go. So password, and now we can see the program /PIDs for all of these process IDs. And it's a Inspire CD. It's like some IRC chat thing. So that's that one. And then there's a script running in the background. Starts with THM. What is the name of the script? Well, if we want to see that, we can just enumerate all of the running process on the system with ps-ef, and we're going to grep for THM. And we see this one right here, THM-24765.sh. So yeah, that pretty much kind of had us going through a bunch of the different Linux enumeration stuff you can do. They show you alternative ways to do different things. And Linux, and I guess Windows as well, there's always a multitude of ways to accomplish the same thing. It's really up to you, like what your preferences is in terms of commands you run, the tools you use to achieve your goals. So the next thing, of course, is we're going to look at pretty much all of the similar stuff. And of course, there are some nuances to Windows, like it's just structured differently, but for the most part, we're going to be looking into the same stuff, but on a Windows system. And so, yeah, let's just go through the same process here. Now, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a minute for this box to start up because, yeah, it, of course, will be a separate machine. So I'll terminate that one, and I'll start Windows system here. And we can kind of preview this while we're waiting on it to boot up. And so we have, stuff like system info, which will give you a ton of valuable info on the target server, the host name, OS, down to the build number, all the hotfix patches that are installed on the operating system. So some really good information, some info on the network card and stuff like that. You can query specifically for patches and stuff like that, installed updates rather. You can look at all the running services. You can start looking into users and stuff, seeing what privileges your user has. This is a huge thing for a kind of a nuance of Windows is the privileges that your account has. So there's a privilege escalation technique called token impersonation, where depending on the privileges that you have, if you have certain ones, then you can abuse that for privilege escalation, which is, I'm sure, a technique we're going to be getting into because the next video or the next room in this red team path will be on privilege escalation. So that's a huge part of Windows PrivEsc is token impersonation, and very common in the real world, might I add. Done this a number of times on real pen tests against real systems, production systems as well. So another thing that we could look at is, anything related to like local accounts, local groups, or domain accounts, domain groups. So depending on if it's domain joined, then your enumeration just got a lot deeper, right? There's a lot more stuff you can enumerate. Now, this specific room here doesn't really go into detail on Active Directory enumeration, kind of previewing ahead that will be a future thing that is covered in this path. But right now, it's mostly, I would say, sticking to local enumeration. And I think as you're learning this stuff, it's very good to start out simple, right? Start with, if you're new to this stuff, start out with some local enumeration and then start learning Active Directory and how to enumerate that from there. So that would be my general recommendation. But of course, we can look into the same kind of networking stuff, network connections with netstat. Their flags are slightly different than Linux, which is something to keep in mind. We'll see here in a minute. But yeah, let's go ahead and SSH into this Windows box because they have it set up to be running SSH. That will give us a PowerShell prompt. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in. All right. And so let's start looking at these questions here. Full OS name and OS version and hotfix. How many hotfixes are installed? Well, the nice thing is all of that info is provided to us after we run this system info command. And I have seen on CTFs and stuff where it blocked you from running this command, but you can enumerate this information multiple ways, right? So keep that in mind. If you're in a situation where you can't run system info, you might still be able to get a lot of this stuff. And here's one thing that's interesting is TryHackMe. I believe they use Amazon. Yeah, they use Amazon EC2. So all of these servers that you're doing on TryHackMe are just cloud hosted servers on Amazon AWS. So pretty interesting thing to see. And this is actually a T3A small, which explains a lot, right? Because when you're using TryHackMe, like for you guys that have been using TryHackMe for a while, you might have had the experience where it's like, man, compared to Hack the Box, the machines are so slow, right? And this is part of the reason why a lot of these instances that they're using are pretty small. Well, actually, I'm not too sure about T3A. I know T2 small would be pretty low amount of resources, but it looks like this is as well because it's only got one processor. Does it give us info? Yeah, and it's got 2 megabytes of memory, right? So yeah, that's why these machines are slow because they are using AWS and not very small instances. They're not giving it a lot of resources. So that's the reason that a lot of the machines that you'll do on TryHackMe are very slow. Whereas Hack the Box, they give their machines a lot more resources. But at the same time, TryHackMe gives you your own, I think it's like your own dedicated instance that you spin up, right? Because I had to hit start machine. But I don't know, these might be shared as well, just kind of like how Hack the Box is shared, even though you spin it up. I would think that this is just me going after this box right now since we hit the start machine button. I could be wrong, but so that's probably why they do it that way. But personally, I prefer how Hack the Box has it set up where anyone, you do have the downside of other people looking at the boxes unless you have a VIP subscription, but it is a lot more of a smooth experience. I know that was a bit of a segue, but I just wanted to call that out. You can get a lot more info than just what they're talking about here if you run the system info command. But yeah, we can see here clearly Windows Server 2019 data center, and you got the OS version with the build right here. And then as far as the hotfixes, there's a ton, but it tells us that there's 30. Yeah, very simple to get the first 3 here. And really, there's only 2 more. What is the lowest TCP port number listening on the system? So that's going to involve us digging into the netstat command a little bit. So they ask for TCP. So if I want to find that, I could say netstat. We'll do TNO for TCP. They ask for the lowest. It'll be 22 for SSH. And then what is the name of the program listening on that port? Well, we probably know it's SSH, right? But we don't know. From here, we can see the PID. We don't know what it is, right? So we could take this PID and we can run task list. This is basically like PS, running PS in Linux. Task list, V for verbose, and then I'm going to do a find string, which is like grep for Windows, essentially. And we're going to grep on this process ID. And we see sshd.exe. And it's running as a system, actually. Yeah, and so then from there, we start looking into some services that could run on either Windows or Linux, DNS and SMB. And they talk a little bit about zone transfers. to give you the basic rundown of a zone transfer, essentially what it is when a DNS server it's basically a misconfiguration for a DNS server where it will actually leak all the records. And if you find these records, if you're able to dump all these records, then you may end up finding out information on some other websites, other subdomains that you didn't know existed. And so we can do that here with dig tac t axfr for the zone transfer. We have to supply the domain name and then at the DNS server. So let's go ahead and try that out. I believe that, yeah, because that's the first question here. So the first thing we want to do, if we want to do this on our Kali machine, we're going to have to edit our host file. So we're going to do this from our basic Kali machine, by the way. We don't need the SSH connection anymore. But if I just take a look at the Etsy host file, you can see the entry that I put in here. Actually, I got to update that. IP address for the Windows machine is different now. I'm just going to copy this and we'll put that in. All right, so with that added, what we can do is this command here. Pretty much the same command they gave us. This is how you know you have a successful zone transfer. If you didn't have a successful one, like if I just took this domain name out, for example, it would instead look like this, right? And so what you see here is that it didn't come back with anything. This means the zone transfer was unsuccessful. When you start seeing records, DNS records like start of authority, name server, A records, text records, CNAME, stuff like that, you know that we're successful in your zone transfer. And we can actually see the flag right here. So yeah, we're successful there. And the other thing it asks is to start looking into some SMB shares. SMB is like if I were to open this file explorer on Windows, then you could actually connect to shares and stuff. So like when you browse on a Windows file system, if you're just browsing your files and folders, you could actually connect to shares in that way. That is SMB. So a lot of you guys probably used it before and just didn't know that it was called SMB. So if we want to enumerate that stuff, there's a number of ways to do it. You could use SMB client, SMB map. I prefer crack map exec, so that's what I'm going to use in this one. Now, of course, I'll need the username password for that user. But yeah, I can just put this in, and I'm not sure if the password is the same as when I was testing earlier, but I guess we'll see. Let me put in the IP right here. And tac shares will list out all of the shares for me. So then I'll be able to see all of them. And so just to, because I've looked at SMB shares so many times, I can tell you which ones are default and which ones are custom here. So C $ and admin $, those are default Windows shares, built-in Windows shares you're going to see in all Windows environments. Also IPC, same thing. The ones that are custom are internal, this THM one here, and users. These are all ones that the box creator of this room added manually. And so we could go and start enumerating that stuff because we actually have read access to all three. But yeah, basically this is just the flag right here. Now, if we wanted to enumerate one of these ones, just to take it a step further, what we could do is we could do like SMB client. I always forget this off the top of my head. And if you're in a similar situation, you forget, I would just recommend going to like SMB hack tricks and you can see exactly what syntax you need. So if I do like a control F on SMB client, I can find it. And there's a lot of things you can do with SMB client, but specifically I want to do probably something like, so if we do tac L, that'll just list the shares, which we've already done that through crack map exec. So what I want to do is not going to involve that. It's going to actually involve connecting to the share. So let's scroll down a little bit more. This is one way to supply it. I hate this syntax. There's an easier way to do it as well. And if I'm not seeing it, I might just go grab it from my notes, which is why I would also recommend taking notes on all the stuff you do, because sometimes it's easier just to look it up in your notes, a lot of times, right, rather than Googling for stuff. The way that I prefer to run it would be something like this right here. So I would do SMB client and then 2 forward slashes, the IP address, and then the name of the share. So I don't know, let's say we want to look at the user share. That sounds kind of interesting. And then we do tag capital U, the username, which is user in our case, %, which is kind of weird, %, and then the password for that account, which would be this one. And I'm probably going to need to enclose this in single quotes because of the $ characters. They might be interpreted in some kind of way. So let's try that. Yep. And so we connected. So now I can start listing stuff on the share. It looks like we have the C users. They basically map the C users folder here, it looks like, right? So we can actually go into the user folder for our user account, and we'll see what we're seeing earlier, right? Like this is just my my home folder, basically. Cool, but that's how we could actually move around it, and we could get whatever files we wanted to, like upload and download files. And so, yeah, that's how we'd interact with SMB if we wanted to take that, just a step further from what they ask of us here. Another thing they ask us to enumerate is SNMP, which is a service that runs over UDP that provides a lot of information about like network devices, network communication, stuff like that. And so it operates on something called community strings, which one of the default ones is called public, but they could use any community string. In the real world, if they're using public as their community string, then that's a bit of a security flaw, right? Because that is not secure, right? That's easily guessable, right? But if we know what the string is, which they give us the community string in this case, a lot of times you can enumerate some pretty good information. Now, a lot of pen testers make the mistake of ignoring UDP ports. You definitely don't want to make that mistake. I've been there before. You can really get a lot of good information off of some of these UDP services, especially SNMP, which runs over UDP, I believe it's port 161. Yeah, 161 UDP. Here they recommend us to use SNMP check. I actually prefer SNMP walk for this. And I'll show you guys how I would run it. So I can do SNMP walk, and let me copy the IP. And I would say, let me just break this down for you guys. So SNMP walk, tag C, and then the community string, which they gave us as public, and then V2C to use version 2 of SNMP and the IP address. So we start walking the MIB, and we find the flag here in this string. And we also see some other good info. And sometimes you can find like credentials and stuff in this if it's like a network device that's using, passing credentials unencrypted across the network, stuff like that. A lot of times you can find just useful info on like the hardware and stuff like that, right? So yeah, definitely one you don't want to sleep on. So yeah, we got that, and that's pretty much almost it. The other thing they cover is some of the other tools that aren't built in, stuff like the Windows sysinternal suite, which definitely, if you want to get into pen testing or red teaming, or blue, even the defense stuff on the blue team side, you need to know sysinternals. Really important. I haven't really done its due justice on this channel. I should make more content on sysinternals. You can see a really good list of, kind of overview of all the different sysinternal stuff and a little one-liner description of what they're used for. So I definitely recommend, if you're not familiar with the sysinternal suite, just kind of look through this and see what different capabilities are available on this. Ones that you're going to use the most for offensive purposes are some of the ones they've called out, like Process Explorer, Procmon, PSList, PS Logged On, stuff like that, right? And then you also have Process Hacker, which is not part of the sysinternal suite, but it's also a very handy tool to enumerate information about running processes. And a lot of times if you get access to a Windows system in the real world, if it's used by system administrators or blue teamers, whatever, you might see the sysinternal suite already installed on the machine. So even though it's not there by default, a lot of times, it's so useful for, a wide variety of people in this space, whether it's, on the defense side or sysadmins, that a lot of times you'll see it installed already. And these are provided by Microsoft. Maybe not Process Hacker, but the sysinternal suite is provided by Microsoft. So yeah, a lot of times these servers will have that on there. So definitely if they want to use like logging capabilities, they might have, I think, is that on here? Let's see. Yeah. A lot of times blue teamers will use sysmon, logging and monitoring and trying to catch and detect the stuff that we're doing as hackers on these systems. But yeah, that was, and then you have Ghost Pack as well, Seatbelt. This is a enumeration script. So if you ever used like WinPeas or something before, essentially it's that. It's just for enumerating the system. A lot of times looking for stuff like privilege escalation, things like that. But also, you know, for lateral movement, maybe find some cred somewhere that you can access some other resources on the network or on another network even. But yeah, that was enumeration. Definitely take the time to go through this room and practice this stuff hands-on. Always the best way to learn is hands-on for sure, because this is something you don't want to skip out on. Enumeration is king, really. And that's what people are always going to recommend to you. If you go for OSCP, they're going to say enumerate, try harder, right? A lot of the try harder mentality is just enumerate more and keep looking around, and you will eventually find a way in. That's the thing about these hacking groups, these advanced hacking groups, the APTs, right? They have an infinite amount of time to just poke and prod at stuff, whereas as pen testers and red teamers, we're normally operating on a smaller time scale, right? On a pen test, we might only have like 5 days to find something. On a red team engagement, a little bit longer time frame, but still we're looking at like a way larger scope, and we only have like a month or something, and there's so many things we have to look at. It's a lot, you know, when you have like infinite time, that allows you to do infinite amounts of enumeration. The more you enumerate, eventually you will find a way in most cases. So yeah, definitely don't sleep on this one. And if you're enjoying this content so far, let me know in the comments section below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.